When I stopped at the ocean shore, the sun had already begun to sink below the horizon, flooding everything around with a red light. It was that time of day when all the tourists had already left, and the beach belonged to me alone. Peace and quiet seemed to envelop everything around, but as soon as I took my first step on the wet sand, a cold shiver hit me. I couldn't understand why. It was an ordinary beach, one of hundreds I've visited in my lifetime. However, something was wrong. This feeling, like something was watching me. For the first time, I felt that I might not be alone here. Night was fast approaching, and with it came a sense of danger. I decided not to pay attention to this and continued my way along the shore. But at some point, I saw a strange object in the water. At first, I thought it was just a piece of wood, but when I got closer, I realized I was wrong. It was an old fishing net rolled into a ball, but something stirred among the junk. My heart began to beat faster when I realized that it was not a fish, not a piece of garbage, but a human hand. I jumped back, but I couldn't look away. Thoughts flickered in my head. What is this? Who is this? The hand slowly rose from the water, covered with foam and remnants of algae. I wanted to run away, but the feeling of terror kept me in place. Suddenly, the hand came down again, and I saw the net begin to unwind, releasing something dark and heavy. My heart was pounding in my chest when I saw a face, distorted and disfigured, as if it had been underwater for more than a week. His eyes were empty, but there was a dull rage in them that made me finally move. I started to run, ignoring the fact that my feet were getting tangled in the sand. The sound of the waves hitting the shore seemed to me like voices whispering my name, asking me to stop, to return, but I ran, not even knowing where exactly. One thing was clear: I will never return to this beach again. Looking back one last time, I saw the monstrous object disappearing into the waves as if it had never existed. But I knew better. It was not a dream or a fantasy. And the worst thing is that I knew he would come back. When I ran home, I was greeted by the soothing walls of my apartment, but the feeling of danger did not leave me. I turned several times as if I expected to see that horrible figure in my house, but all was still and quiet. I tried to calm myself down, but the thoughts of what I saw kept me awake. I decided to do something to distract myself. I turned on the TV, hoping that the sounds and lights would help drive away my fears. But the news that went on all channels caused only a new wave of anxiety. They reported mysterious disappearances of people along the coastline. For the past few weeks, only empty boats or abandoned belongings have been found on the beaches, but no sign of those who used them. I felt something cold inside my heart. Those people. Could that creature I saw on the beach be involved in these disappearances? My thoughts revolved around this question, but I could not find any answer. The TV continued to play in the background as I began to search for information on the internet. I was wondering if there had been similar cases in the past. I found articles about mysterious events that were happening on coasts around the world. They described unknown causes of deaths and disappearances. All these stories had one thing in common. Their victims were always on the beaches, usually alone. And none of them ever came back alive. I couldn't believe what I read. All this seemed something unreal, but at the same time, eerily believable. I decided that I could not be alone with my fears. I called my friend Mike, who always knew how to calm me down. But as soon as I dialed his number, I heard only beeps. No one answered. He was usually always in touch. The feeling of anxiety was growing like a wave that was about to cover me with my head. Now I knew for sure. Something terrible was lurking on that beach, and it wasn't going to stop. I woke up the next day feeling like this horrible experience was just a nightmare. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, bringing a sense of security. But as soon as I remembered what happened the day before, the calm disappeared again. I decided to check the news. Maybe the disappearance was attributed to some natural phenomenon. However, in the morning there were new reports that another dead person was found on another beach. It didn't surprise me, but it really stressed me out. This time it was my friend Mike. He didn't answer my calls because it turns out he also went to the beach last night without telling anyone. He was found at dawn, his face twisted in terror. At first glance, it looked like he had just choked, but the deep scratches on his arms and chest indicated a struggle. This was not a mere coincidence. I had to do something. But what? Tell the police about what I saw? They wouldn't believe it. Who would believe a story about a dead creature that appeared from the ocean? Maybe I should just get out of town, get as far away as possible. But the feeling that I had left something important unfinished made me stay. I decided to go back to that beach. It was a stupid, reckless plan, but I saw no other option. Maybe I can figure out what happened and finally put an end to this horror. I prepared for what I might find by taking a few things that might come in handy: a flashlight, a knife, and a cell phone. I also wrote a note detailing everything I knew and left it in case I didn't come back. When I found myself back on the beach, the sun was already setting behind the horizon, leaving only a red tint on the water. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, but it was mixed with something else, rotten and musty. I didn't want to go any further, but something inside me made me do it. My foot again touched the same place where I had seen the creature. There was nothing on the surface of the water, but the feeling that someone was watching me did not leave me. I turned on the flashlight and began to look around, looking for at least some clue that could explain what I was seeing. And then I heard a sound. At first it sounded like the whisper of the wind, but when I listened, I realized it wasn't just the wind. The sounds were words, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. They echoed from everywhere like an unobtrusive hum, and involuntarily I began to move in their direction. The sand beneath my feet felt wetter and colder than it should have been, and when I finally saw the source of the sound, I was filled with terror. There, at a distance of several meters from me in the water, stood the same figure that I had seen the day before, but now she was closer, and I could see her face more clearly. It was distorted, covered in seaweed, but the eyes glowed in the darkness with an eerie, inhuman fury. I stood frozen, feeling the cold seeping through my skin to my very bones. Guns with invisible icy fingers bound me, preventing me from moving. The creature slowly approached me, and with each step the water splashed to the side, silently confirming its reality. I finally came to my senses, but instead of running away, I did what I shouldn't have done. I spoke. "Who are you? What do you need?" The words flew out of my mouth before I had time to realize that I was saying them. The creature paused for a moment as if considering my question. Her head tilted to the side, and I could feel her studying me as if deciding what to do next. Then, slowly, she raised her hand, pointing to the ocean from which she had emerged. "Come back," she whispered in a voice like the rustling of dead leaves. These words were so unexpected that I was confused. What did return mean? Was I supposed to go back to my life? Or did she mean something else? Suddenly my phone rang, loud and sudden, making me flinch. I answered mechanically, but my gaze remained locked on the creature in front of me. "It's me, Jack," came Mike's voice. "Listen to me carefully. I don't know how long I can talk, but you must do what I say. You must go back to that beach." I almost dropped my phone. Mike was dead. I saw his body in photos, read about his death in the news. But now I could hear his voice distinctly, and it only added to my terror. "Mike! How is that possible?" I whispered, keeping my eyes on the creature. "I don't have much time, Jack. She won't let me stay here long. You must go back, find what is hidden at the bottom, and bring it to her. This is the only way to stop all this." My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't understand what was going on, but if my friend, even a dead one, was asking me to do something, it could be important. "What should I find?" I asked, trying not to lose control of myself. But at that moment, the connection was lost. The phone burned and turned off, even though I knew for sure that the battery was charged. I was left alone with this horrible creature who continued to stare at me with its empty eyes. I took a step back, feeling panic take over me, but the same words of Mike echoed in my head again. "You must go back, find what is hidden at the bottom." What could it be? And why should I trust the voice of a dead friend? But I knew I had no choice. This might be my only chance to end this nightmare. I pulled myself together, and without looking back, I started to run back to my car. When I finally got to the car, my mind was still reeling from the experience. I tried to come up with a plan of action, but my thoughts kept getting confused. I knew only one thing: I must return to this beach. It was crazy, but what was left for me? All these mysteries, deaths, horrors, it all started to make sense, even if I couldn't fully understand it. I decided to go home and get ready. I needed a scuba tank, a flashlight, and maybe something else that might be needed for exploring the seabed. My hands were shaking as I gathered my things, but I tried not to think about the fear that was consuming me from the inside. I also found an old map of the coast that I had left from one of my previous vacations. On it, I noticed a small island, which was not far from the place where I saw the creature. Something told me that this is where I should be headed. The night was already dark when I returned to the beach. The water was calm, almost like a mirror, and only the moon illuminated my path. I launched my boat and swam to the island, trying not to think about what might be waiting for me under the water. My thoughts returned to Mike's words, that which is hidden at the bottom. What exactly did he mean? I imagined the wreckage of an old ship, a forgotten treasury, perhaps some artifacts related to that creature. But I knew the real answer could be much scarier. I reached the island and started preparing for the dive. The ocean around me seemed quiet, even too quiet, but I felt that I was not alone. Something or someone was waiting for me under the water, and the thought made me feel eerie. When I was ready, I let out one last sigh and plunged into the cold water. The light of my lantern cut through the darkness, showing only parts of the seabed covered with algae and rocks. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly began to swim in what I thought was the right direction. Deeper and deeper I sank until I saw something that made me stop. In front of me lay an old fishing boat, overturned on its side as if it had been abandoned a long time ago. But there was something strange about it. There were some symbols carved or painted on it. I couldn't make them out, but they looked old and menacing. I swam closer to get a better look, but suddenly I felt something cold and slippery touch my leg. I turned sharply but saw nothing. However, it made me realize that I am not alone. Something, or someone, was here with me. I decided not to linger any longer and dived into the open cabin of the boat. It was dark inside, but I saw what I was looking for. At the bottom lay a small chest, closed and tightened with a chain. My hands were shaking as I took it. Something inside told me that this particular chest was what Mike was talking about. But just as I was about to rise to the surface, something began to move all around me. I realized that these were not just shadows. They were the same figures that I had seen earlier on the shore. They surrounded me from all sides, preventing me from escaping. I knew it was deadly dangerous to stay here. So, holding the chest in one hand, I swam rapidly upward, trying to avoid these creatures. They reached for me, but I swam faster than they could reach me. When I finally surfaced, I was on the verge of passing out. The sea around me was calm, as if nothing had happened. But I knew that now I had what they wanted. And the question was whether I should go back with him to the creature on the shore. Breathing heavily, I pulled the chest up to the boat and with great effort pulled it aboard. My heart was beating loudly, and every muscle was shaking with tension. I raised my head, looked at the dark shore, and saw that the same figure appeared on it again. She stood there, silently watching me, as if waiting to see what I would do next. I couldn't bring myself to go back there, to her, with that chest. Something inside me cried out about the danger, about the fact that it is impossible to fulfill her wishes. But at the same time, I understood that this might be the only way to end this nightmare. My thoughts were confused and I couldn't make up my mind. I looked at the chest again. It was old, but strong, tightened by a rusty chain. What is inside it? What mystery could cause so much horror? A gut feeling told me that this thing should not be revealed, that its secrets were best left buried in the depths of the ocean. But something stronger than me made me look at this mysterious object again and again. I decided to sail away from the island. Perhaps on the shore, in my hometown, I will be able to understand more about what I am holding in my hands. Gradually, I started the engine and slowly began to swim away from the ominous shore. My gaze returned to the figure that now seemed to be standing closer to the water, watching my every move. Suddenly, she raised her hand and pointed to the ocean again. This time, her movements were more aggressive, as if she was warning me or telling me to do something. But I paid no attention as I continued on my way. The boat's engine loudly cut through the silence, and with every meter I could feel the tension rising. The water around began to stir again. At first light, barely noticeable waves. and then they began to grow as if something big and terrible was rising from the depths. I understood that these were not just natural waves, but something connected with that chest. Suddenly, the boat shuddered violently, and I almost fell overboard. The waves were getting stronger every second, and it was getting harder and harder for me to steer the boat. I looked at the chest, and horror came over me. It began to glow from within, emitting a faint but disturbing light. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to throw the thing overboard, but I knew that would only make things worse. The water around me was boiling as if the ocean was preparing to swallow me, take me with it into the depths. Then I heard a voice. It echoed loudly in my head, mixing with the noise of the waves. "Give her back, or you will be a part of this ocean forever." The voice was deep and eerie, as if the ocean itself was talking to me. I held my breath, trying to decide what to do next, but there was no time to think. The waves were rising. The boat was creaking under their pressure, and I knew that if I did not do something immediately, I would not survive. I realized that the only option was to return to shore and do what the creature demanded. I was scared, but I saw no other way out. I turned the boat around and steered it back to the beach, hoping to get there before the ocean swept me away. When I reached the shore, the creature was already waiting for me. She was standing almost at the very edge of the water, her eyes glowing in the darkness, as if looking straight into my soul. I couldn't help but shiver as I slowly approached her with the chest in my hands. She didn't move, just stared at me. Her gaze was as impenetrable as the water around us, but I felt she knew my every fear, every thought that crossed my mind. I stopped a few meters away from her, lifted the chest in front of me, and reluctantly placed it on the sand. All my instincts screamed of danger, but I couldn't stop myself. Something that didn't belong to this world was driving me forward. The creature silently approached and stopped in front of the chest. She bent down, touching it with her long, thin fingers, and I saw the light inside the chest begin to fade. "It was buried for protection," she said without looking up. "They thought they could hide it from me, but I will always find what belongs to me." I felt my heart clench with fear. There was some deep, ancient truth in her words that I could not understand. But one thing was clear: I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have looked for answers. The creature slowly opened the chest, and a wave of cold air came out, so icy that I almost fell to my knees. Inside was a small, almost imperceptible thing, an old compass. It was made of dark metal, engraved with symbols I couldn't make out. "That's all they tried to hide from me," the creature said. "Now you'll be free if you return it to the ocean." I should have realized that it was all a trap, but the fear and the hope that I could get my normal life back made me believe her. I took the compass in my hands, feeling how it cooled my fingers. "Throw him into the sea and you'll never see me again," she whispered. I did not delay. Out of fear and desire to end this horror, I went to the water and threw the compass into the waves. It quickly disappeared into the water, leaving behind only a few small splashes. But nothing has changed. The creature was still standing in the same spot, staring at me with its empty eyes. "You lied!" I shouted, realizing that I had made a terrible mistake. She did not answer, only began to dissolve in the air, like a fog gradually disappearing at dawn. But before disappearing completely, she whispered, "You yourself found what was hidden, and now your soul belongs to the ocean." With her last words, I felt something heavy and dark wrap around me, like an invisible chain tightening around my chest. The ocean, quiet and merciless, was waiting for me. The cold penetrated my very heart as I stood on the shore, paralyzed with fear. Invisible chains were squeezing me, and it seemed that the air around me was getting heavier. Each breath became a torment. The ocean in front of me was calm, but now I knew it was just an illusion. He was waiting for me, preparing to absorb and never let go. My legs began to involuntarily move forward, as if something was forcing me to walk towards the water. I tried to resist, but each step was taken with an incredible effort, as if I was fighting not only my body, but also the dark force that possessed me. My body carried me forward, and in my head there was one question: what will happen next? My feet touched the cold water, and I felt the invisible chains tighten even more, pulling me into the depths. I found that I could no longer control my body. The water rose higher and higher, and soon I was up to my chest in cold waves. The inner voice that had screamed of danger had now subsided, leaving only a sense of dire inevitability. I was submerged in water up to my shoulders, and just when I thought it was the end, everything around me went silent. It was as if the sea itself paused, waiting. I felt something under my feet. It was hard and cold, like metal or stone. I looked down and saw it, the same compass that I had thrown into the water. He lay there on the bottom, but the light from him was even stronger now, emitting an ominous glow. And suddenly, something terrible happened. The ground beneath my feet began to rapidly separate, forming cracks from which dark, tentacle-like formations began to emerge. They squirmed, grabbing my legs, pulling me down. I tried to fight, but they were stronger than anything I had faced before. I began to scream, trying to break free, but the voice echoed in the void like an echo in the darkness of the night. The tentacles dragged me deeper, and each moment became more and more unbearable. The cold filled the whole body, and the water around began to glow with a strange, phosphorescent light, which seemed to highlight the horror that was happening. I felt myself losing control of my body and mind, as if they had become part of this never-ending nightmare. My body slowly sank into the bottomless darkness, and the last thing I saw before finally sinking was the same compass glowing at the bottom. It glowed with the same light I had seen earlier when I opened the chest, and suddenly I realized that it was not just an object, but something much more, something that embodied all the horrors and dark secrets that the ocean hides. And just when I thought that nothing could save me from the inevitable end, something happened. I felt a sudden push, as if something or someone pulled me back, brought me back to reality. The water around me began to lose its eerie sheen, the tentacles disappearing as suddenly as they appeared. I surfaced, gasping and coughing, but alive. The water was calm again, and the shore was empty. The creature disappeared, as if it had never been there. I lay on the sand, trying to regain consciousness, realizing that I had experienced something terrible, but at the same time mysterious and unreal. What really happened? And why did I survive? These questions did not give me peace, but I knew one thing. I would never again approach this place and seek answers to those questions that are better left unanswered. I lay on the wet sand, trying to catch my breath. The water still lapped quietly nearby, but now it didn't seem so hostile. The usual coolness of the sea that enveloped my body almost made me forget what had just happened. But the memories of those tentacles pulling me down, of that strange compass, and of the sense of inevitability, they stayed with me. I stood up, feeling my body struggle with every movement. Every muscle ached as if I had run a marathon. But there was something else inside me, an inexplicable feeling of fear that settled deep in my soul. It wasn't just anxiety or panic. It was something more, something that would haunt me even in my dreams. I turned to the water where I had recently been fighting for my life. The surface of the sea was calm, as if nothing had happened. The sun had already begun to sink below the horizon, casting long shadows on the beach, and this made the atmosphere even more eerie. It seemed that nature itself hides those secrets that are better not to reveal. I tried to figure out what exactly happened. Maybe it was just some incomprehensible coincidence, or my imagination played a cruel joke on me. But intuition suggested that it was not just a hallucination or fear, but something much deeper. I could no longer deny what I saw. It was not a dream or a vision. It actually happened. I began to walk slowly along the shore, my legs still shaking from the experience. The brain tried to piece together everything that had happened, but without success. All those things that happened around me, they had no logical explanation. And that was what scared me the most. Walking along the deserted beach, I suddenly felt something strange under my feet. At first I thought it was a stone or a shell, but when I bent down and saw what it was, terror pierced me once more. A small but noticeable blood stain lay on the sand. I touched her, and my fingers turned red. The blood was fresh. My thoughts began to race in search of an explanation. If it was my blood, I would have noticed sooner. But I was whole, despite the recent terrible ordeal. So where could this blood have come from? And what does that mean? There were no traces around, no signs of struggle or other people to leave this stain, and that scared me even more. She just appeared, like all the other horrors that happened here today. I lifted my head, looking ahead along the beach. The shadows from the trees seemed to begin to move, absorbing the light that was still left. And then I heard a sound that made my heart stop. A dull rustling, as if someone or something was moving in the thick grass next to the beach. The sound reminded me of something I had heard before when I was little and listened to old fishermen's stories of strange disappearances on this shore. They spoke of old legends, that this place was cursed, that the sea would take away those who stayed too long near the water after sunset. But then I thought they were just fairy tales, scary stories to scare children. Now I knew it wasn't. The stories were reality. Something was here, something terrible and invisible that haunted me. And now this something was very close. The rustling in the grass grew louder, and I realized that something unknown was approaching. My legs, though tired, made me move faster. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my body, making my heart beat twice as fast. I ran without looking back, leaving the beach and the horror behind. The trees that grew along the coast seemed to lean towards me, trying to grab me. Their shadows grew longer and thicker, giving the impression that I was running through a dark tunnel with no exit. I raced forward, trying to break away from my pursuer, not even knowing who or what it was. But it seemed that the darkness itself was chasing me, surrounding me from all sides. The beach sand beneath my feet turned to stones that cut my bare feet, but I couldn't stop. My path led to an old fisherman's hut located on the edge of the beach. I knew about it from local stories, but I never dared to go there. It has always stood empty, gloomy, and threatening, abandoned decades ago. Now she seemed to be the only chance for salvation. I jumped into the door of the hut and slammed it behind me. It was dark and damp inside, the air filled with the smell of old age and decay. My chest felt like it was about to burst from the frantic work of my heart. I listened, trying to hear if what was out there on the beach was following me. The silence inside was deafening, but suddenly I heard footsteps. They were quiet, cautious, but inexorably approaching the hut. Cold sweat ran down my back as I searched the darkness for some form of protection. But the hut was almost empty. Only old, dusty furniture which could protect only from the wind. The steps became even closer. They reached the door. I froze, holding my breath. The doorknob slowly began to move down. My fingers felt a piece of old pipe lying on the floor. It was the only item that could be used as a weapon. The door slowly opened and I saw a figure. Her face was obscured, but I felt a piercing gaze on me that seemed to pass right through me. Fear bound me, paralyzing my body. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. This moment seemed like an eternity. But then something unexpected happened. The figure took a step forward and I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my chest. It seemed to me that something inside had burst. I looked down and saw blood on my hands. A searing pain shot through my body, forcing me to fall to my knees. The figure approached me, bending down so that its face was level with mine. The eyes were empty, dead, and the lips whispered something inaudible. I wanted to ask what was happening, but the strength was leaving me. The world around began to blur, become dim. Time seemed to stand still. The pain in my chest was excruciating, but now with it came the realization that I was doomed. The figure raised its hand and touched my face. Her touch was colder than ice, and in that moment everything became clear. It wasn't just a person. It was something else, something that had always been a part of this place. A power that fed on fear and pain, that lurked in the shadows, waiting for someone to fall into its trap. And now I became her prey. The figure's eyes lit up with a cold blue light, and suddenly I knew that this moment was the end of me. I felt the life drain out of me with each heartbeat. Everything around me went dark, and the last thing I saw was the same piercing gaze that pierced me to my very soul. In the end, only darkness remained, and nothing more. Darkness enveloped me, taking away the last vestiges of consciousness. It seemed to me that I was sinking into an abyss where there was no light, no sound, no hope. It was the end, and I accepted it. But something has changed. A light appeared in the darkness, weak and distant, but it was slowly approaching. I realized that I was still alive, although I couldn't understand how that was possible. The light grew brighter, and I began to make out outlines around me. I lay on the shore, feeling the cool breeze touch my face. The water washed over my feet, and I heard the familiar sound of the waves. I opened my eyes and saw that I was lying on the same beach where this terrible night began. Everything looked as if nothing had happened. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft pink and orange shades. I got up and looked around, as if that terrible night had never happened. No tentacles, no dark figure. But I knew it wasn't just a dream or a hallucination. It actually happened. My body still hurt, but inside me was the worst. The emptiness and fear that was left after I faced the darkness. I looked again at the sea, which calmly splashed by the shore, and realized that it no longer seemed beautiful and peaceful to me. I will never come back here again. This beach, these waves, they will forever remain a place of terror for me. A place where I met true darkness and survived. But did I really survive? I turned and walked away, knowing that a part of me remained there on the shore. And no matter what I do, this place will always pull me back, reminding me of what happened. But I will never again succumb to this call. I've seen enough. I walked along the beach, hoping that the dawn would dispel all the remnants of the night's horrors. But something inside me told me that this was only the beginning. It was hard to believe that everything had actually happened. I tried to console myself with the thought that it was a terrible dream, but the pain and fear that remained reminded me that it was real. My legs automatically carried me forward, away from the hut, away from the sea, away from this place. But I stopped when I saw something unusual. On the sand, in the place where I had just been lying, there was a trace, a body print. But it was not mine. It was bigger, and it was like something huge was lying here next to me while I was unconscious. I scanned the beach but saw no other tracks, just this big footprint to remind me that I wasn't here alone. Fear began to creep into my soul again. I subconsciously felt that I had to get out of here before it was too late. I started moving faster, almost running. The wind picked up, throwing grains of sand in my face as if trying to stop me. The trees on the coast were making noise as if they were whispering something unknown, mysterious. But I didn't listen anymore. The only thing I wanted was to leave this place. I managed to reach the road that led to the nearest town. The freeway was empty, not a soul around. I walked for a long time, feeling my strength draining, but I could not stop. I didn't look around. I didn't want to see if what was on the beach was following me. But the feeling that I was not alone did not leave me. I heard footsteps behind me, the rustling of leaves, an invisible breath mixing with the wind. I felt that this was not the end, that this story will not leave me wherever I am. Even if I run to the other side of the world, it will find me. I reached the city when the sun had already risen above the horizon, illuminating the streets and buildings. But even here, among people, I did not feel safe. Everyone around seemed strange, not like before. It seemed that they were looking at me, but did not see me. It was as if I had become invisible, even though I was here among them. I decided to check into the nearest hotel to rest and think about what to do next. But even in the small room, with its cozy interior and warm light, I did not feel at peace. Something inside me was screaming that this would not end, that the darkness would continue to follow me. I sat on the edge of the bed trying to calm myself down, but then I heard something that made my heart stop. Far outside the window, somewhere on the outskirts of the city, a low, shrill sound was heard. It was the same whisper I heard on the beach. I went to the window and looked out. The streets were empty, but the whispers did not stop. It grew, became louder, filling everything around. It seemed that the city was beginning to come to life, and this life was not human. The light in the room began to flicker. I felt the cold seeping through the walls, through the floor, and covering my entire body. I tried to turn on the light again, but it went out completely. Darkness began to slowly envelop the room, and whispers grew, mixing with some incomprehensible sounds. I felt it was the beginning of the end. I realized that running away was futile. What was haunting me was not just a ghost, but something much worse. It was the very darkness that I now knew would never leave me. Darkness filled the room, leaving me alone with a terror I couldn't explain or overcome. And then I realized that nothing would save me that night. I have become a part of this nightmare that I will never be able to leave again.